Okay, how about another example of the quadratic formula to make sure we got the hang of this, and so I can show you one thing that could happen when you're using the formula. So we're going to solve the equation 4x squared plus 1 equals 4. Now, before we can start sticking numbers into the formula, what do we have to do to get ready? How do we have to set things up? We have to rearrange the equation so that we have a 0 over here. That means we're going to be subtracting 4x on both sides. But I don't want to write it as 4x squared plus 1 minus 4x, because that's going to confuse me. I don't want the x on the end. I want the x term in the middle. So it's going to be 4x squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 0. So when I put numbers into the formula, what do I put in for A? 4. What do I put in for B? Negative 4, the coefficient on the x term. And what do I put in for C? 1, the constant term. So when I do that, it looks like x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 all over 2 times 4. Simplifying that a bit, the minus negative 4 would just be a positive 4. The negative 4 squared would be a 16. The 4 times 4 is 16 times 1 is 16. And down here, the 2 times 4 is 8. And continuing the subtraction under the square root sign, 16 minus 16 would be 0. So under the radical sign, we just get a 0. 4 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 8. Of course, the square root of 0 is 0. And this time, instead of getting two different solutions, we just get 4 plus 0 would be 4 over 8, and 4 minus 0 would also be 4 over 8. So this time there's really only one solution, and that's where x is 4 over 8, which in lowest terms would be 1/2. So usually we get two different solutions, but this time we only got one solution. There's only one number that we can put in for x and have this equation be true, and that's the number 1/2. So the part of the formula that's underneath the radical sign is called the discriminant. And it's important because it lets us know what kinds of solutions we can have, what kind of a situation we can be dealing with. If it comes out to be a positive number, that's when your equation has two different real number solutions. If the part under the square root sign comes out to be a negative number, then your equation doesn't have any real number solutions. So if those are the only kind you care about, then you can just quit right there and say, no solutions of the kind we care about, no real number solutions. But sometimes you do want to say what the solutions are, even if they are non-real complex numbers involving I. So that's what it means when you get a negative number under the radical sign. And the other thing that can happen is that the discriminant could come out to be exactly 0. And when that happens, you only have one solution to your equation, which is a real number. So we've seen examples of all of those. We saw this example where the discriminant came out to be 196. And the solutions were 2/3 and negative 4. We saw this example where the discriminant came out to be 24, and the solutions were the two real numbers 5 plus the square root of 6 and 5 minus the square root of 6. And then we saw this example where the discriminant came out to be a negative number, and so our solutions were complex numbers involving I. And this last example, the discriminant came out 0, and so we only got one solution. Okay, let's try one last example, and on this one I am going to use a calculator. because the numbers are kind of complicated. They have decimals. And so this is the equation 2.5x squared minus 7.3x plus 5.329 equals 0. But just like any other quadratic equation, I can use the quadratic formula. Is it set up the way we want it to use the formula, or do we have to rearrange it first? No, it is set up the way we want. We've got our ax squared, we've got our bx, we've got our c, and it's equal to 0. So we're going to be putting in 2.5 for a, negative 7.3 for b, and 5.329 for c, which is going to look like this. X equals minus negative 7.3 plus or minus the square root of negative 7.3 squared minus 4 times 2.5 times 5.329 over 2 times 2.5. So let me reach for my calculator. And let me just start by putting in the part that's under the radical sign, the discriminant. So that would be, I put parentheses around the negative 7.3, and then I put a squared sign outside the parentheses, because I want to make sure I'm telling the calculator to square the number negative 7.3. If I put it in like this, negative 7.3 squared, the calculator would probably square the 7.3 first and then make the result negative, which is not what I want. So to make sure the answer comes out positive like it's supposed to, I have to either put parentheses around that negative number that I want to square, or I could just put it in as 7.3 squared. Since I know it's going to come out positive anyway after I square it, I can just leave the negative out and put it in as 7.3 squared. Either way, that squared minus 4 times 2.5 times 5.329 is, well, hey, what do you know? That came out to be 0. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that this is the kind of quadratic equation that only has one solution. So instead of getting two different solutions, one when we do the plus and the other when we do the minus, we're just going to get one solution. So under the radical sign, we got a 0. The square root of 0 is 0. Now we just have to do the rest of it. Okay, we have a minus negative or a positive 7.3. And then adding or subtracting 0 doesn't change that. It's still just 7.3 divided by, now if I put it in like this, 2 times 2.5, or with parentheses, I'm not going to get what I want, because it's going to divide by 2 first and then multiply the result by 2.5. I want it to divide by this whole thing, 2 times 2.5. So I'm going to put that in parentheses. So I have 7.3 on top divided by 2 times 2.5 on the bottom, and that comes out to be 1.46. So that is the solution to this quadratic equation. It's 1.46. If you want to check that, you can grab your calculator and ask it to do 2.5 times 1.46 squared minus 7.3 times 1.46 plus 5.329, and it should come out to be 0. So that's the quadratic formula.